Okay.
All right. Boom, ready to do it?
We're all clipped in.
Clipped in and ready for another edition of Nostr News.
That's okay
That's
position.
looking good.
Yeah. Okay.
I think it's nice away from your neck like that.
Beautiful.
We're still figuring out the logistics of how to do walking podcasts.
Yeah.
I had my cheap drone replacement. I have a stupid belt that I ordered from Amazon that lets me hold a camera off of my waist, and it really doesn't work well.
Not yet.
Not yet. It's an iterative process.
Exactly.
And
Just like all startups.
I did a bunch of research on drones, and I think they get shot down here in the Presidio. So.
What if we take a drone somewhere else? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, probably like Ocean Beach.
Yeah.
Or maybe maybe somewhere in the Headlands or something we could do.
Yeah. So maybe next time we'll be coming to you guys with a drone from Ocean Beach.
Yeah. They also sometimes the flight time can be quite limited.
Okay.
So if you want to just rip for a couple hours like we sometimes do, we might need extra drones and extra chargers and stuff like that.
All right. Well, give you guys something to look forward to.
So right before we flipped it on,
Yeah.
we were talking about the balance sheet of startups. And we're talking about, if you're running a Bitcoin startup, do you hold your balance sheet in, of course, Nostr News, we're going to get right into Bitcoin.
Of course, exactly.
Do you hold your balance sheet in USD, in BTC, in some mix, and how do you think about that? And you've invested in a lot of these startups, so what's the idea? What do people like to do?
Yeah, I
thinking
mean,
about?
In general, I see most Bitcoin-focused companies, whether that's Layer 1, Layer 2 with Lightning, which is more what I focus on, or now sort of adjacent with Nostr. I would say in my experience, the majority, have some exposure to Bitcoin. It obviously depends on the founder, how much. Some people, maybe it's a smaller amount, 10, 20%, some upwards of 50 or more. And I think in general, it's most of the people that are building the space obviously are extremely long Bitcoin. Most of them have been that way and perhaps have their own, personal situation with a lot of exposure as well. And, obviously it can go really well, make you look like a genius, or go really poorly and make you look like not.
Right.
I mean, my general rule of thumb, like we were talking about, is if your expenses are still in USD, you want to make sure obviously you can make payroll for 18, 24 months. And then beyond that, I think at the end of the day, if you're bullish, hey look, we have a nice little heron.
Oh yeah.
This is a new addition to
go.
Nostr News, baby.
Nostr News with the heron.
Yeah. Hey, heron.
Right.
But beyond that, look, at the end of the day, I think all of these companies are very long, and so far, it seems to be a nice sort of side effect, investing in hard money over USD. But we'll see if time is in our favor or not.
The most extreme example of this I've seen was, I don't want to call them out by name, but a company I think we each invested in, and and when it comes time to wire the money, and he's like, "Are you gonna send me BTC or stablecoin?"
Yeah.
I was like, I was just gonna send you a USD wire. You can do whatever you want with it. but yeah, he was gonna try to operate the company without touching traditional fiat rails, which I thought was bold, maybe unrealistic, given the state of the world. Aspirational.
Totally.
For what we hope the future will look like,
but pointed in the direction that, obviously, that we hope gets there. So.
Yeah.
Kind of on that note, since we're already talking about Bitcoin, I'm sure we'll talk a lot more about Nostr in a second, but it's been a busy couple of weeks here. You've got some really good things, or obviously all of this year we've seen, sort of normies coming in via the ETFs, which has led to price appreciation, which has led to the virtuous cycle of more people reading about it and all the good that comes with that.
Yeah.
We've also had a bunch of, what seems like kind of fear and FUD with people concerned around non-custodial wallets and mixers and stuff shutting down. What's your general take on where we are right now?
Oh man, I think we've got a lot of, more diversity of things that people can do, and entry points and touch points, to me, is always better. Like, if somebody said, look, you can't touch Bitcoin unless you're doing it the right way, which is, fully cold storage, self-custody, I'd be like, I think you need a little glide path onto it, to figure it out. So if your glide path starts with just playing a little bit with the ETF, fine. I'm not going to hate. If you
Totally.
want to get on Coinbase, I'd recommend River, but if you want to get on Coinbase,
Me too.
fine. I get it. Like,
Yeah.
just to play around and understand.
Right.
So I think it's just like, there's not one right answer for everybody. So I think more of these,
More choices.
more choices is better.
Yeah.
As far as kind of the ETF stuff, all the non-custodial stuff, I think it's interesting that it's kind of having a moment where people are finally more aware of all the trade-offs and the problems. I guess what was it Samurai Wallet
Yeah.
that was doing? What do they run a mixer themselves, or they help?
That's my understanding. I don't know all the details, but I do believe they never took custody of any funds, but they did run a mixing service.
And so what happened? They got shut down because of that?
Yeah,
So
again,
they had to go offshore or withdraw from.
it seems
their
like they
SAP
were
store?
arrested, and I don't know all the details. My high-level take is it seems like there was a lot more there going on than just non-custodial. I mean, it seems like there was talk of bragging about flouting law,
yeah.
which is probably not the best
Right.
route to go under the radar. I don't know. I mean, it seems to me like I think perhaps there's a bit of an overreaction. I mean, on the one hand, maybe this is the then they fight you stage. Certainly is shaping up to be that way on some fronts. On the other hand, there's a lot of really great non-custodial providers out there that I think one thing I'm seeing kind of behind the scenes with a lot of startups, which is a great sign, is startups are kind of bifurcating a little bit. Either they're going to go full sort of compliant, which I think the reality is for a lot of normies or whatever, that's the way to go. I mean, it's for the super hardcore enthusiasts, obviously that's not the way that a lot of them will go, and that's great too. But for people that are, like you said, maybe they have an ETF, maybe they want to try a payment, so be it. And then on the other hand, then you have a lot of these other really talented technical teams that are more ideologically motivated. And I'm seeing a lot more that are really focused on how do we do self-custodial node on the phone. A lot more people are playing with LDK.
Yep.
And I think that's great too. So I think it's good in the sense that it's focusing people. If you're going to go after the newbies and be compliant, so be it.
Yep.
If you're going to go after and really focus on how do we finally get the technology to make non-custodial workable, and maybe that includes not just non-custodial Lightning, but I'm sure we'll talk a lot about this today, but Cashew or Fedimints,
Right.
eCash, that's great too. And so I think if anything, my big takeaway is it's focusing builders, and I think all
Focusing
roads
on making some of these harder decisions, really focusing on what the trade-offs are
Yes.
to various approaches.
Well, focusing on two levels. One, making those trade-offs and understanding the pros and cons, and then focusing on building solutions. Like, I've always kind of been in the camp that if you really want non-custodial to work, however that is, you can get so far and just to kind of play around with it mode. But if you really want it to work, you need to pressure test it. And that means you need okay, we need this tool to survive. Just like I think Bitcoin, in the early days was kind of playing around. You got pressure tested with stuff like WikiLeaks.
Yep.
And I think in the long run, short run, I have no idea. Maybe it's bad for adoption for a little while, but long run, all solutions, all pressure that leads to better Bitcoin solutions, more options, and better technology is good for Bitcoin. And
Yep.
I think in the long run it'll be a good thing.
Yep. And you've got a BitKey, but you haven't played with it yet.
I played with
much,
it
right?
once.
Okay.
I just wanted to test it out.
But I think that's something. It's both Bitcoin and Nostra relevant in the sense that
Yep.
Today it's really built for the Bitcoin use case, but you could imagine it being part of just overall how do you manage private keys.
Yep.
I had sent it to a very experienced security expert engineer friend of mine. He's actually building a security startup.
Oh.
But he's not really into Bitcoin or Nostr or anything. And he was like, I'm open, but I don't really get it. Why? And he said the UX is too hard. I can't imagine that. He's like, I could do it, but I can't imagine other people are gonna be able to manage keys and stuff. And then I showed him BitKey, and he was like, oh wow, this makes a lot of sense. I could see how a normie user could use this to be able to manage private keys. He had some questions, but we got into the details, and I think he was finally pretty convinced.
Who do you think the target user for BitKey is?
I think I've heard, I don't know if it was some marketing message, but I think kind of like a Schwab user.
Okay.
Somebody who's in TradFi, not like a cypherpunk type, not really into, maybe like an ETF user, right?
Yeah.
Like somebody who's kind of want to. I heard that I'm supposed to hold my own keys, but that sounds messy and complicated and challenging, and there's so many trade-offs, and I hear about people getting rugged all the time.
Or just losing it.
Yeah, like I just don't know. It's something, this crypto stuff, how do I handle it, right?
Right.
And I think it's really good for that user. That's a very large, I mean, it's basically like probably I don't know what you call it. There's probably tens of millions of accounts in the US.
Yeah.
Probably more worldwide.
Well, I think one thing that got me really excited about it is, for those who haven't played with it yet, a couple of the interesting features. One is it's a 2 of 3 multi-sig. Block holds a key, you hold a key on your phone, you hold a key on a special device that you just operate with a thumbprint, which is cool. You also can, I believe they give you the option to have an encrypted copy of a key on your Google Drive.
Yeah, I think you can put it whatever cloud you can configure, Google or Dropbox or whatever.
Whatever cloud,
I think.
Which is nice as well. And so I think all of that is definitely a huge step in the direction of how could a normie take more ownership over their keys. And I think that's going to be super important for Bitcoin, obviously for Nostr. We'll talk more about key management in a bit. And just in general, I think the one thing that has made me most excited about is that Block as a company, I don't know if you saw, they put out their new shareholder letter. Obviously, Jack and the company are all in on Bitcoin. That's amazing. They're doing a great job of making the case to the market. But I'm most excited because, it's showing that they have commitment not just for software, which is great, but like now the fact they had this BitKey, which to me looked like an Apple product, Apple level product, which is great design, easy user experience, relatively speaking. They've got the mining chip now.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, in the shareholder letter, you have the Cash App number, which I didn't know was this high. Obviously that comes pre-baked in with the BitKey. 20 million people have touched Bitcoin on Cash App. That's huge.
And I think it contributes to 300 million of gross profit.
Something like that, yeah.
Like not trivial. I mean, it's not the majority of their business like a MicroStrategy.
Yeah.
But it's not trivial anymore.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic. And also I think underappreciated fact about that is Cash App tends to be low income users, or at least it started that way in the South.
Yeah.
Shout out to the South, dirty. Memphis, let's go. And so that's awesome because now, these are people that probably would not be getting exposure to Bitcoin otherwise.
Yep.
And a lot of it, assuming is also more millennial or Gen Z focused. Anyways, I think it's fantastic. Like the more you can kind of get this easy flow of, I've got Cash App, oh, there's an easy way for me to buy some Bitcoin, this is interesting. Okay, now there's an easy way for me to move it to BitKey, that's interesting.
Yep.
It just seems like Block is really sort of focused in the right direction, and I think it's great for Bitcoin.
Yeah. So, Nostr.
Let's go to Nostr,
What's happening in Nostr? Like, what are you excited about? What are you paying attention to?
Totally.
What's top of mind for you?
Well, top of mind, you saw this, you gave me some great feedback, which I appreciate. I put out an essay last week called Nostr is Identity for the Internet. And my hope with this essay was to kind of give people, and obviously some of the people that are hardcore already have a lot of these ideas, but to give a variety of people, other investors in the space, sort of the Hacker News type community that's interested but not following along with every step, and frankly, even a lot of the Nostr people that maybe haven't seen the big picture yet, what it means for Nostr to be identity beyond social media. And so one of my sort of like core theses was I sort of go through in the paper and describe why I think Nostr as a self-issued and managed sort of identity system, which is something I know you harked on, being very kind of similar to the Bitcoin ethos, and an open data layer for the internet, what else all that can enable, and what I kind of see as the next, several waves of Nostr adoption. And what I came away with was my thesis right now, and I would love to see, I'm sure I'll be surprised and other things will pop that I never imagined, which is great. But you've got the social media, let's say there's tens of thousands of people using that regularly. A couple 100K have downloaded Nostr apps, put in lightning addresses. I think there's like 250K Nostr pub keys that have an associated lightning address. So there's a bit of a core base right now, and most of those people are Bitcoiners. Now, in my view, that's very much a feature, not a bug. I think it's fantastic because those users now, you have enough of a core hot base in the Bitcoin community that you can start to build interesting identity and data solutions to problems for Bitcoiners. And so the first one is payments. Obviously, we did our now infamous little example with Primal. We could also do that with Mutiny and other solutions that are adding this to use Nostr for the lookups. You get the Venmo or Cash App experience and send those payments. Cool. So now you've got, for other people that have a Lightning address, again, that Bitcoin sort of hot core of users, they can now use Nostr for the lookup to send payments. Amazing. What comes next? I think it's going to be probably other Bitcoin related services. The things I'm most excited about right now are eCash mints, DLC oracles, and eventually local Bitcoins, just like peer-to-peer trading for a variety of reasons. And I think my general takeaway is, in a world where perhaps there's more crackdown on, sort of what license exchanges that people can do, if you really want Bitcoin to fulfill its promise of peer-to-peer currency, then we also need peer-to-peer ancillary services and reputation around that. And so if you're choosing a Bitcoin or an eCash mint that's Bitcoin backed, whether it's a Feta mint or a Cashew mint, the good news is, and this is something that bitcoinmints.com and Mutiny already do, you can pick those mints, which are effectively banks, which effectively mean you need trust, based on a Nostr web of trust. And because most of the users in Nostr are Bitcoiners today, I think there's already enough of a critical mass to give you signal on, okay, I trust using this one or I don't. I think the next one I'm most excited about is probably DLC oracles. And DLC oracles, for those of you, I'm sure most people in this podcast are familiar, but discrete log contracts, basically the ability to do betting of various kinds, whether that's long short Bitcoin, whether that's creating synthetic stable coins, whether that's any kind of like prediction market. The one thing you need for all of that is a source of truth, and agreeing to what source of truth to use and whether that source of truth will publish what they say they publish. Again, I think we have enough of a hot core of Bitcoiners to be able to say, okay, this is what DK and Bob and Tony and all these guys are using as their price feed. Probably a price feed I'm willing to use.
And so there's at least two versions of this that I've heard.
Yeah.
One is data vending machine. Can you do you know at all about how that works? Can you give an overview of that? Because I think it's a Pablo project, right?
Yeah.
And is it, I think it's out and people do stuff with it, and it's something around being able to sort of send sets and get a service, but I haven't actually encountered one in the wild. Where would I find one today?
Well, so data vending machine, this is another great example. This doesn't necessarily have to be used with the eCash mints or the oracles. Data vending machine is like a standard, and I'm certainly no expert on this, but my understanding is you can basically create markets for computation. And what I mean by that is, and I think the DVM was a bit of a tongue-in-cheek at EVM, at the Ethereum virtual machine. Like this is the real world, it's computer. You can basically say, hey, I have a piece of data and a payment value, and I would like to contract out or put a bid for this, these two things together to get a new piece of data. And in doing that, as an example, you could say, hey, very simple example, I want to take a brief, which is essentially data, to create an ad for my company. And in order to do that, because keep in mind DVMs are also composable, I need to farm out to 10 different workers, whether those are AI agents or humans, whatever, I don't care.
Right.
I need to farm out someone that creates the background, someone that creates the copy, someone who creates the marketing list, and I need all of those. I need to send one payment that I'm willing to pay, that's my bid, and I need to be able to have that payment split and the information shared from one actor to the next. And so in theory, you could do all kinds of, like basically any computation with this.
So it's doing computation and it's managing payments, but is it getting towards like trust minimization in some way? Like do you have a way to trust minimize around, what kind of oracles you have to rely on for like that price feed that you were mentioning?
So I don't know exactly how the spec works, but my understanding is you can set conditions with this. So as an example, you could say, hey, I want to, as part of this whatever thing that I'm making, this ad or whatever, I want to show a price of Bitcoin in there as well. And in order to do that, I need to farm out to another DVM, which will give me a quote of a price. Now, how do I choose that one?
Well, how do you choose it? Like, what's the reputation of a given DVM?
So I don't know if the current clients already have this built in. I would assume if they don't, this will be something very, available very soon. But you can basically choose based on market price, that's the bid, but also reputation. So you could say, as an example, I want to find someone that does not exceed this price, 100 sats or whatever, but then I want the highest reputation based on my Nostr web of trust, all the people I follow or follow me. Or what I'm also looking forward to, I think this is going to be very interesting, is the ability to create. So if you think about web of trust, there's implicit, explicit. Implicit here would be, these are the people I follow, these are the people they follow. In that web of trust, give me the highest rated underneath a certain threshold for cost. But you could also do it explicit. So using something like Jeff G's lister, you could say like, hey, here are the 5 price feeds I trust. I trust whatever, Coinbase, River, Kraken, and eventually they'll be on Nostr if they're not already, and Cash App. And so any of these 5 greenlit price feeds I'm willing to use. And so in that case, I'm just saying whatever's the cheapest of these 5.
Okay, but you're somehow somebody has to establish trust to start it, right? Like you have to kickstart it by having some price feed that somebody chooses to pull the feed from to do a transaction or rely on that. So is that, do those things already exist? And are they sort of already establishing that kind of trust?
I don't know if anyone's doing a DVM price feed yet. Maybe it does. But I think the beauty of using Nostr for this is you can easily publish. Like, hey, here's the service I'm providing. I'm actually not sure, someone listening to this I'm sure can correct us, if the buyer or the seller of the service is the one publishing the bid.
Yeah, because the other approach to this problem that I've heard of is where there are these reporting nodes, and there's some sort of protocol that somebody's designed to allow you to interrogate one of these reporting nodes for a price feed, but it doesn't know that you're relying upon it. So you can it doesn't know who you are, and it doesn't know that you're relying on it. So you could actually ask 3 or 4 different ones, and if 3 of them come back in consensus with each other, you could take that, and if the 4th one is crazy, you can sort of dismiss it. But they don't really know who is making the request, so it's harder for them to kind of collude. And you could sort of agree, I think, in a DLC, which ones you want to execute the contract for.
And I think that, my guess is that'll actually become more popular over time, like blinded, so that the person offering the price feed doesn't know who's using them. That makes total sense to me. Or you could even have imagine some kind of I guess almost like a multi-sig version, or like an average, a weighted average. You're just like, hey, okay, here are the 5 providers. I want a weighted average, or use this unless one of them is 2 standard deviations away. Exactly. But yeah, I think that's a really fertile ground. And as we were discussing, I think, again, the key insight I was trying to get at with the article, and there's a lot of other stuff I think Nostr is going to be used for. I talk about a bunch of other use cases for the Hacker News crowd that are not Bitcoiners yet. But particularly these Bitcoin use cases, the reason I'm so bullish is, for any new application, you need to start the cold start. You need to solve the cold start. You need enough users on there where the web of trust among your users gives you valuable signal. And I would argue that we already have enough users that are in the Bitcoin scene that you have more than enough trust signal for any of these services right now. I think that's a solved problem. Obviously more is better, but I think those products will probably be most successful because, for example, if I'm asking, I don't know, I want a botanist that can tell me about the Presidium. Definitely not enough signal, unless you or some of your buddies are, hiding out your botany knowledge. But if I say, okay, I need DLC Oracle signal or Cashew Fediment Mint signal, well then I'm literally just going to say what is DK using, what is Steve using, what is Pablo, Tony, Million, Will, all these guys. And that's a valuable signal to me.
So will one of those people start the first one? When you're going to kickstart this, will somebody just start a mint, or
it's a great question. I mean,
get comfortable using them?
I think the 2 projects that are most interesting right now, there's bitcoinmints.com, and that it's nice because it's a really easy place to publish a review for a mint. And I don't know if you can launch a mint there or not, but you can at least easily add a mint to the list and add a reputation or like a rating. So that's really cool, because then you can go on there and just say filter by like first or second degree connections.
Yep.
Cool. And then Mutiny, I think, just like kind of abstracts a lot of the way from the user. It's just like, here's one that's recommended by your friends.
Right.
So
And Mutiny so far is using Fediment, but may move toward Cashew.
I don't know if they have any plans to move to Cashew. I know they started with Fediment. You know, I think both Fediment and Cashew are very interesting. I'm less of an expert, I'm not an expert on either, but on Cashew. My guess though, so if I had to kind of guess how this whole world is going to go, personally at this moment, I am particularly excited about Cashew, because I think what's going to happen is, if anyone in the world can launch a mint. So with Fediment, the benefit is you can have multiple parties together. Cashew, my understanding is it's just one. One person's launching a mint. But I think that's okay, and in fact I think it's easier, because the friction for one person or one organization launching a mint is, okay, it was just one. And so what I think is going to happen is it gets easier to connect any Lightning funding source with a mint. And remember, the mints, the key, I think, breakthrough on why Fediment and Cashew and all this chiming eCash stuff is interesting now, like why now, is one, Bitcoin backing, obviously, but more importantly, interoperability with the Lightning Network. So all of the instant final settlement and payments that you want, you can get in and out of, you know, an eCash token Lightning and back instantly. And so what I think is going to happen is you're going to see, you know, I tend to be as an investor and just like as a, you know, observer of the world, more bullish on bottoms up in general. And so if you have a world where anyone on their computer or any organization can, with 1 or 2 clicks, create a mint, and maybe that's tied to their Alby or their Mutiny or whatever, or, you know, their Ellen bits, then you're going to have just this like massive wave of experimentation. And so I think you're going to see basically free banking on steroids. And that to me is very exciting, because, you know, of those mints, and by the way, you can have, I think Callie from, you know, Cashew showed that you could have multiple mints coordinate a payment together, which is interesting. So maybe each one only has whatever, like, I don't know, 10,000 sats worth of value, and you aggregate 100 of those together for a big payment. That's cool. But my guess is what's going to happen is you're going to have a whole wave. You know, some people are going to use tiny mints based on people they know and trust. So like, okay, DK is running a mint, like probably he's not going to rug me. And, you know, whatever, we have this reputation. But over time, I think a lot of these mints will fail. A lot of people will get rugged. But the ones that survive, sort of, basically you're going to have evolution, are the really good ones.
So is it reasonable to say, as a straw man, that let's say, you know, Bitcoin layer 1 was invented, meant to be eCash, you know, electronic peer-to-peer cash, and it kind of, you know, for a bunch of reasons doesn't quite work at that layer. So Lightning was invented to try to fix some of those problems, like, you know, lower fees, faster transactions, and you know, I think there's other problems with Lightning in achieving that goal, but maybe Lightning, these cashews or these mints are one layer above that, which between the mints, they use Lightning, so they don't have all the liquidity problems that you have with like end users. They can sort of establish channels and have them, you know, sort of beefy channels that are more accustomed to transacting in Lightning native Bitcoin.
That's right.
And then the eCash has become a different trade-off of, you know, censorship resistance, privacy, finality, speed. So is that so in that world, is that sort of the way you see it? And if that's the way, then is Lightning really going to be, if that's the world that appears, does Lightning then become this interconnect layer between mints, but mints are the things that almost every person uses and most people don't touch Lightning or layer 1?
Yeah, I mean, so I definitely would agree that Lightning is going to become this kind of glue between a lot of different Bitcoin scaling solutions and will remain a Bitcoin scaling solution itself. I mean, my best guess is short term, a lot of people are still going to use custodial services like Cash App. And so imagine a lot of people use Cash App, Strike, whatever other services plug in from other countries, you know, Bitnob, Beepa, whatever. And for all of those services, in a way you can think of it as there's different kinds of banks, right? And so those are like, okay, these are regulated companies, they have to deal with KYC and compliance and all this stuff. That's the downside. The upside is they have to deal with KYC and compliance and stuff. So like they're probably not going to rug you, and or if there is, there's some kind of recourse. And they're all connected via the Lightning Network. So if you're using a Cash App to Strike payment, that's going to be over Lightning, and it's going to be instant and final settlement. If you want to use this in a different way, either non-custodially because of your personal reasons for wanting that, or maybe you're in an emerging market where you don't have the option, or you're in an authoritarian country or whatever, you can't use a regulated entity, then I do think that as of right now, Feta mints and cashew mints, like eCash mints, probably seem like the most scalable solution. And all of those can also be connected with Lightning, and that's the beauty is you can have these companies connected with Lightning, you can have the mints connected with Lightning, you can have users with their own individual channels if they do have the resources and the technical skills to run their own node, which most people probably won't, but for those that do, that's great. And Lightning connects them all. Over time, I'm not ready to call these eCash solutions the total winner yet. I'm very bullish. I think it makes a ton of sense. But over the next decade, maybe we'll see new scaling solutions, right? Like you had, Robin and Super Testnet come out with the BitVM paper. That could allow other kinds of side chains that could peg in. Liquid, which hasn't gotten a ton of adoption, but it's still there. All of these things can also plug in via Lightning into this one big network. Even as I've mentioned in prior podcasts, and as Casey of Ordinal infamy now, as he once talked about with Lightning Bridge, you can even have Lightning bridges to other quote unquote crypto chains, where as long as they have an HTLC, you could in theory, use those chains kind of in the John Pfeffer utility token thesis. Okay, whatever, I need this, whatever chain it is to complete a transaction on Solana or whatever, but my value is in Bitcoin. So the values of Bitcoin, you swap in and out of whatever you need real time. I'm personally more bullish on the easier to interoperate solutions. So I think, companies and eCash mints are more natively hooked into Bitcoin, so I'm more bullish on those. But I think over time, we could see a whole bunch of different scaling solutions for a whole bunch of different reasons. And as of right now, the best way to link those seems to be Lightning.
Cool. And so on the eCash stuff, some of the stuff we were talking about is something like a stable coin. Is that something you've already been seeing or playing with, or sort of?
Yeah.
Where do you think that? How do you think that touches the eCash world?
So what's really interesting is there's a couple ways you could do a quote unquote stable coin. To be clear, I think on the century long time horizon, it's Bitcoin only. Maybe even in a couple of decades. But in the short term, there's no question that stablecoin adoption on Tron and Ethereum, whatever roll-ups they've got, there's no question people want dollars, for a variety of reasons, whether it's trading or people in emerging markets, there is value to the dollar today. And so I do think being able to
people
create...
see stability in it because they have bills due
branding.
In that.
Yeah,
it's like some Lindy effect, and some people have bills due in USD, so they sort of,
that's right.
That's what they need access to. Kind of like when we started off, we were talking about the balance sheet of startups, right?
Yeah, exactly. And as much as everyone wants to YOLO all the way into Bitcoin, you do have to in a month from now, you have to pay your whatever, your COGS in dollars. So I think what, I see a couple ways this could go. One way, and it's really hit me, it's kind of strange actually, I know I've been thinking too much about this stuff lately, because I was explaining this to someone in a dream and I was like, oh, okay, now I get it. This is how we know we're two into Bitcoin Nostr. But one way you could do this is, so anyone can create a mint and issue dollars, but they can accept Bitcoin. Now, how they do that is up to them. And how they build trust and reputation with users, up to them. Free banking, right? So maybe some will use proof of reserves and say, look, 1-to-1, if I issue this Bitcoin token, it's worth 1 Bitcoin. Others, though, may say, look, I'm taking in Bitcoin and I'm issuing stablecoins. And in that world, if you think about it, what they're kind of doing is it potentially can be a levered long on Bitcoin, because they're taking in Bitcoin, issuing out dollar reserves, and you're kind of betting whatever the reserve ratio is that Bitcoin does better over time. Obviously, I'm well aware that the reason Bitcoin exists is because of the failure of banks, and I do think there's going to be a lot of ruggings here, to be clear. I personally am not stoked to use a lot of this stuff in the first go-round, but there will be people who have no other option, so I think it's valuable. So anyway, so that's one way, is you just kind of you take in Bitcoin, you issue whatever your eCash token is, whether it's for dollars or Bitcoin, those will be the most popular. And you figure out how to establish trust with people. My guess is a model like that could really work, probably the winner here on the medium term is Tether. Like whichever mint Tether uses, or they make their own, or maybe a country like El Salvador does it. That's one way to get a lot of trust because, they've been around, they haven't gone bust yet under many cycles, but you're still trusting them, to be clear.
Right.
And that could change. Beautiful view. So that's one way to do this.
There it is.
Another way to do it is to create a synthetic stablecoin. And this is what Galoy does right now, and other people as well with stable sats, which you take a simultaneous long and short position on Bitcoin. The problem with that is, in order to do that, you need to trust some exchange to take the counterparty position. But as you were describing to me, perhaps there's a way to do this with DLCs in a non-custodial way using Nostr for reputation.
Yeah, that's actually one of the ideas from the edge that I will propose.
Please.
I think we look at Nostr, and a lot of the clients are social media type clients. I think it's a great use case, but I think the payoff is you don't get rugged years from now.
Right.
And the change is you have to set up a whole new system and find a bunch of people to follow and good content in the near term. So I think there's a little bit of a mismatch around the social media use case. I think it's valuable,
right?
But I wonder if the idea from the edge I'll propose is that maybe Nostr will get most of its momentum actually outside of a social media use case.
Yeah.
And an interesting one that's been on my mind a lot as we've been talking about, eCaches and mints and various services like that is maybe Nostr is really the best way to publish the metadata about services.
Yes.
So if your wallet needs to figure out which mints it should be using, or if I need to figure out which, I'm using some wallet software that needs to figure out which mints you're using, and I can send some Bitcoin via Lightning to a mint that you're using to get eCash so I can transact with you. That kind of needs to live somewhere.
Totally.
And it kind of needs to live sort of in the public. You don't want that to be locked down to like a central server somewhere, right? So the idea I'm proposing is, I think the social media application, use case of Nostr is great, but is not as immediately, desperately obvious why you absolutely need it today. Whereas the coordination of these various tools does need a metadata commons where information about the tools and the coordination of them can live. We don't, if we didn't have Nostr, there'd be nowhere. There's no alternative. There's no second best. There's nowhere else to do this. So that's one of my ideas from the edge as we arrive here on the edge.
I love it. Yeah, this is
the edge of the Pacific.
I don't know, man. Every time I see this, I can't help but smile.
Looking out, there's Japan over there. If you squint, you can see it.
God damn. Yeah, man. On a sunny afternoon, it's hard to beat this. What a gorgeous. And by the way, something I've been trying to focus on as to decide is like, as the world gets crazier and crazier, it's important to remember there's so much good out there.
Oh yeah.
And even on Nostr, I love Nostr, but still social media. Actually, I'm glad you're bringing this up because to me, social media, even if it's more decentralized, whatever, frankly, I've noticed myself, just in general, the less time I'm scrolling on any kind of screen, and the more time I'm actually with friends, IRL, in nature, the happier and healthier I feel. And yeah, it's just important, as shit gets crazy in the world, to remember that, to appreciate just being outside. And I think that's really important.
Take some time to walk, take some time to breathe.
Yeah.
Take some time to
touch the grass, as they say.
Grass, yeah.
So beautiful. Yeah, man, I couldn't agree with you more. I think I'm very bullish, particularly on these Bitcoin use cases first, because that's where we have enough critical mass to get signal.
Right.
But yeah, I could not agree more. The metadata, I need to make this payment, and Nostr Wallet Connect is getting a ton of adoption, which I think is fantastic. And okay, cool, I need to make this payment. And Callie was teasing on Nostr the other day that, he's already got a wallet using Nostr Wallet Connect that can use both Sats and eCash, which is great.
Nice.
And so maybe you need to, find a route for a payment, or, find a way to use multiple mints that can accept from Lightning, and then the person you're trying to pay, like you said, maybe they have metadata where it's like, I want to pay DK, but he wants to use Steve's mint or whoever's, and so I need to have that metadata of like, these are the mints you'll accept.
Yeah.
I think it makes total sense.
So on you were talking about your piece on identity, and I think Nostr, in a sense, helps us build new kind of reputations around the stuff we say. Like if we've been on there writing things for a year, you can kind of investigate and be like, yeah, I think that's the real DK. He says he is. But we don't really have like an identity system per se. We sort of, in Nostra, we mostly kind of outsource identity to DNS.
Right
Through the NIP5s. And it seems like, we talked a little bit about, hey, are there ways to create some sort of canonical identity system, maybe with ordinal inscription stuff? And then I heard like some of the rumblings. I didn't follow the MicroStrategy Orange announcement. I don't know if you followed that or heard the scuttlebutt on it, but I think there was something there around decentralized identities and how they were writing them to the Bitcoin blockchain. I know that I asked for more info about it on Nostr, and Tony from Mutiny was kind of like, oh, this is junk. I worked on it for 5 years. It's a dead end. I don't know. But I like to hear the pro and the con. Like, what are the reasons to believe it might be something, and then what are the reasons to be skeptical? Well, and I wonder if you have either of those viewpoints to add.
I have some thoughts. I'm certainly not an expert on DIDs, let alone like the specific MicroStrategy one. I do think it's interesting for certain kinds of data, maybe DNS data in the future, to be written to the blockchain, to the Bitcoin blockchain. I don't know exactly the best way to do that. I know from what I can tell, I actually went to this identity workshop a couple weeks ago, and it was actually cool. I got to chat with some of the, the block team and some other folks there, the TBD guys, who are more focused on this sort of DID world. And I know that's big in sort of corporate land, like Microsoft and other major tech companies. Yeah. What I was hoping to do was kind of like, hey, figure out, are there bridges between Nostr and these communities? And are there ways that, maybe we can add some of the things they need with DIDs? I will say I came away, even though I was very encouraged by their openness, I still don't fully understand it all, which to me is a bit of a bad sign, that like I got Nostr like this because it's so damn easy. With the DIDs and VCs, verifiable credentials, I get the idea that you want to have some sort of like global view namespace for a name, and then the verifiable credentials, some way to like attach credentials, like, oh, this person, whatever, went to this school or worked here or whatever. Right. So I get the use case. One of the challenges I saw is there's all these different DIDs. Like there was Ion, which is what I think at one point Microsoft and Block were playing with. Now there's Sailor's thing. There's like DID Web. And apparently, I was talking to a girl from one of these companies, and she was like, well, they don't actually interoperate. And I didn't really understand that. So that was kind of confusing to me. But in general, I think, my kind of takeaway as both a technology enthusiast, as investors, twofold. One, if it's that hard to understand, it's going to be challenging to get bottoms-up adoption. Yeah. I think the genius of Nostr is, a simple pub private key pair. Yeah. So easy. Now, there's things we need to figure out to make that kind of resilient and real identity. Yeah. Rekeying. When we start more about this, social recovery might be part of that. Pre-signing other identities might be part of that. Yeah. But I think Nostr has the much more challenging thing, which is to get actual adoption already kind of going. And the other thing is, I go back and forth on this. I'm curious your thoughts. Like, while I certainly see value in having, DNS from a global namespace, I'm also, kind of the view that Nostr embraces a core sort of fundamental truth of reality, which is that even in the case of Bitcoin, it's the best thing we have. But even then, you could still have reorgs, right? There's no such thing as like perfect sort of top-down truth or view. Right. There's only a lot of perspectives. Right. And Bitcoin is the closest thing we have to that, and it's extremely expensive. And even then, you can still, for some period of time, have that change.
Well, everything's probabilistic, right?
Well, everything's probabilistic, but more than that, it's also like everything is different from different perspectives. Like one observer has a very different view of reality from a different observer. A simple example would be, the biochemistry that you're born with, or the experiences that you've had have changed you biologically in a way that you literally may see the world differently.
Yeah.
And obviously it's hard to say that because you can't be someone else. Although in Nostr it's cool because you can pop in someone else's npub, which I love, and you can start to have that, different view. I am increasingly much more bullish on this idea of emergent web of trust. I think explicit is interesting too, but implicit web of trust, where look, we're never saying there's 100% certainty this is the DK you think you know.
Right.
What we are saying is, in the same way that the early cypherpunks wrote about PGP, and by the way, I just think Nostr is kind of fulfilling those PGP visions because people are actually using it. It's the first public-private key system. I think it already has more users than PGP and is growing much faster, other than Bitcoin, obviously, that has adoption. And so, what you can say with certainty is the pub key that I believe to be Steve says this is DK. The pub key that I believe to be Bob says this is DK. And you build this web.
Right.
Can I say 100% this is DK? No. And I don't think that you're ever going to be able to do that.
But those are still sort of mapping to whatever npub that we choose to use. But is it important, do you think, to have a globally unique namespace?
I don't know.
Or is that just we can have software fix most of the problems that we can sort of have other layers of software that kind of fix the problems that mostly come up from not having that unique namespace?
Honestly, I'm not sure.
Or continue outsourcing it to DNS indefinitely?
I definitely think a replacement for DNS seems valuable. I also think that probabilistic identity can probably get us pretty far. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I've sort of always hoped or imagined that there could be some sort of systems that it's easy to tell somebody how to find me.
Yeah.
But where nobody controls that system.
Right.
And we were talking a bit about, when we were looking at your identity piece, we were talking a little bit about why are Bitcoiners and Nostr people so similarly, why are those such overlapped kind of viewpoints?
Right.
And I was proposing that I think a lot of it comes down to the fact that you can create an account, let's say, which in Bitcoin doesn't have accounts, but in Nostr you can create an account or an identity just by doing your own math on your own machine, right? You don't need to ask a server, you don't need to ask for a username, you don't need to ask for a password. Permissionless. And everything else that kind of plays with these ideas, whether it's the Mastodons or Blue Sky or Farcaster, they sort of have these accidental maybe pinch points where they say, hey, we're going to solve for better UX by just issuing names,
right?
Or having ENS issue names or something, right? There's different approaches I think that different services take, but ultimately that becomes a very centralizing force. Who gets to issue names is also who gets their throat choked when they're told to take it down. but I think it feels to me unrealistic unless there's a very different UX. It feels unrealistic to be passing npubs around forever.
Yeah, sure, totally.
And NIP5s are a fine enough band-aid, but something more native, I don't know. I'm excited to see what something more native to a Bitcoiner, view on the world would something a little more Bitcoin adjacent, let's say.
I agree, and anyone listening to this that has thoughts or projects they're excited about, I would love to learn more. I guess the one thing I'll say for now is I'm increasingly bullish on, as much as I would love that, and maybe there will be some kind of taproot signature where you can't have a whole or a bunch of Merkle trees rolled up and you can have a bunch in one transaction. Maybe it will be ordinals, but I'm increasingly okay with this view that maybe there is no global truth, but there's just it's just a web, and the more connections in and out of things.
Yep.
And maybe that means it's tricky because you have to figure out it doesn't fully solve some of these relay problems of well, what if you're not on the right relay with the right person to find them in the first place?
Right.
And I know that Gossip, or whatever they're calling now, Outbox, solves some of that.
What is Outbox?
It's just another name for the Gossip protocol, which I believe is a way to share notes between different relays. But
to share notes, okay, we're gonna take a quick final view of the Pacific here before we venture inland again.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, and to be clear, I'm not the expert there. We should ask like Pablo or someone, but I think the problem they're trying to solve is how do you have, a way that one or two or three or four or five relays don't have all of the data, but the data can still get shared around between them. But yeah, I'm certainly not an expert on how
And
exactly that works.
is the goal to have the data replicated in more places?
I believe so, and I believe the goal is how do you have data, where it can live in multiple different places but still get shared around. I think, but
Okay.
This would be something better for Million or Pablo probably to talk about.
Couple things that were triggered from a comment you made a while back.
Yeah.
Talking about user growth. Did you see this note that Will shared about he shared some internal analytics of the Damus
I didn't see that,
relay?
no.
Very cool, because it's hard in a decentralized system. It's hard to really understand like how many people are using it and how many people are reading from it and stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like you can get write statistics, but it's harder to get read statistics. And he shared some. I think it was just shy. I want to say just shy of about 700,000 monthlies.
Monthly users?
Yes.
Holy shit,
on
that's
the-
way bigger
well,
than I thought.
Yeah, I don't know how to properly evaluate. Like,
Right.
are they bots? Are
Exactly, okay.
How many are like passerbys, or did somebody write an app that kind of just spits out a bunch of
Got it.
users for some accident? So I don't want to make a strong claim about exactly what's happening, but that was, I'd say, surprising, impressive, promising.
Yeah.
At least directionally.
I did not see that, yeah.
I shared a note. I think it was just about last day or two.
Cool.
So I thought that was pretty interesting to note around kind of user growth, kind of usage, let's say.
And even if it is like someone's doing multiple bots as well.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
fact that people are still interested enough to be running that many right now,
Yeah.
that's fantastic. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm pleasantly surprised. One sort of thought on that. I mean, I would love to see this note. And I know there's some debate over what is a trusted user, and again, perspective, who gets to decide. One question on that is, I do wonder, because whenever you see like on Nostr.band, for example, they publish their stats and they have, it's call it 20 to 30K weekly active users that he or Tor using his formula is calling trusted.
Yep.
I wonder, something I've always thought is, if that's recording people that are taking actions like posting a note, sending a zap, reposting a note, or even giving a like, those are all pretty active steps. I've always wondered, is the just like super passive reading group a lot bigger? Like, is that the tip of the iceberg? I mean,
Right.
I'm not saying it is or not, but
And I think that's where it's hard to fully triangulate them. But I'd be interested to see that. But I think that's where the Damus relay data looked interesting, because it was one of the first perspectives that may show maybe more global activity, assuming everybody reads from Damus.
Yeah, it's
probably
the
kind
biggest
of the
relay.
case.
yeah.
Then you get a better picture of the network. Not that everybody reads exclusively from Damus, but that at some point during the month they have pulled some messages from Damus.
Totally. It's as close of approximation we're gonna get.
Yeah, as opposed to the writing only stuff. I think the stats.nostr.band shows writing, which could be a reaction, so it could be a very lightweight
Right.
writing action, but
It's still taking an action
yeah,
instead of just like reading.
which is more limited.
Yeah, I mean, that's really encouraging.
Yeah.
I hope that's right.
So I've been, I just had my last, 48 hours on Nostra. I've just been I've had some sort of random chaotic energy,
Okay.
just writing more stuff and just
Yeah.
active and stirring the pot around the stuff that sort of has been on my mind.
Stir away.
Well, one thing I haven't really, I think one thing that I'm interested in is I wrote this note, what do we need to help Nostr succeed faster?
Well, I love that note.
And
a
I
great
wonder, do you have your top 3 things, or where's sort of your head on it?
Well, I think I can speak for things that I personally would like to see, and what my sense would be valuable for the community. Personally, I would like to see more interesting content, obviously. I think the only reason I really use Twitter still is, for interesting AI type content that's not on Nostr yet, really.
Yep.
It's mostly just on Twitter. So personally, I would like to see more of that. some music stuff that I like is on Twitter. But I think that's probably all that's going to come later.
Yeah.
Maybe some of like the open source AI stuff could come here earlier, but that's a personal thing I would want to see. In terms of what I think could really, pop next, what I would like to see, I would like to see a lot more people using the Nostra metadata stuff that we were just discussing for Bitcoin specific things. I just think that we have the right critical mass. So the eCash discovery and reputation, local Bitcoins, I'd love to see someone building that. I guess Nostra is the first one to do that.
Yep.
I'd like to see other people doing with their own version of that, plugging into the same order book and the DLC stuff. I'd also like, in in that essay I talked about some of the next wave of, let's say, not Bitcoiners, but, Hacker News people that are interested in open source, kind of get the problem of a centralized identity. I would love to see more experiments around, some of the open source agent stuff. Open Agents is playing with this now. Like, there was a tweet actually yesterday that I reposted, sort of tongue in cheek, but it was Moxie from Signal.
Yeah.
And his point was like, look, the reason AI agents are not taking off yet, it's not any problem with the AI. The AI is great, but it's really hard to speak between different applications and services because there's walls everywhere between apps and the internet. And so I do think there's a real interesting opportunity for, building kind of what Christopher Dave is doing, Open Agents. I'm sure the Cascader guys are playing with this too, to have a bunch of Nostr native services, data feeds, content that various bots can easily use and compose together, whether it's through DVMs or something else. I think that's an area I'd like to see more exploration in. And then just in general, I know it's something we chatted a bit about, with Steve and some others, but I would like to see more mainstream content where people bring their fans. Maybe it's focused on themes around freedom or whatever. Although that's personally less interesting to me. I was more interested in if we were somehow able to, purple pill like Curtis Yarvin on there.
Right.
That's interesting. Or some of the more, out there philosophers. And just get them to bring their audiences, and they're doing it because A, they think the principles are cool, and B, because they're, making money.
Right.
I
feel like that a lot of the ideas you mentioned are sort of content focused. And I do think like for the social networking, social media type use case, I think, having some sort of great content is really important. And I'd say at least among the networks that I'm connected to on Nostr today, it's very Bitcoin centric, which is fine.
Yeah.
I think it's a great, hub of like-minded people who are gathering. It's kind of the water cooler for Bitcoiners, let's say.
Right.
So I like that, but it also feels like it's kind of that niche is served, but we either need that niche to grow up a lot if you want Nostr to grow, or need to find other niches. And I think it's like a popular idea that creators should come and, bring their audience, but I'm not sure that there's a value prop yet for a big creator to come and bring their audience. Because if they already got their audience established somewhere else, YouTube, Twitter X, whatever, Instagram, then why bring it over? You need a reason, right? And if the reason is Zaps, great, but are they making that much money with Zaps? Because in Twitter you get payouts, right? In YouTube I think you get 55% rev share.
Really?
Yeah, on
That's
the
more than
ads.
I thought. Okay.
So, I'm a Nostr fan mostly for kind of technology ideological reasons. To me, it looks obvious. If you spend the time, it looks obvious that this or something very similar to this is how we should structure publishing on the internet.
Agreed.
But if you're if you're Mr. Beast, why should you be here?
Yeah.
You're actually really well served by the existing platforms.
One thing I would just throw out is, to be clear, in my mind, the sort of next wave of adopters, I think needs to have, maybe they're not Bitcoiners. In fact, I kind of wish they were, but they have both some ideological overlap, and then also the Zaps. So one example, I'll tell you who would be a dream person for me to see posting and embracing Nostr, would be Matt Mullenweg. And he's mentioned Nostr before. I know he's looked at Mastodon, some of these other things. I think he's someone that would be interested in the principles.
Right.
I'm sure the Zaps are a nice sweetener. Even if it's not the money itself, but hey, people actually care enough to send me money. And I do think for a certain group of people, as we've seen in kind of the value for value podcasting ecosystem, for a lot of those guys, although there are people like Adam Curry, who from what I understand are doing quite well at that because they have huge audiences, like well enough to like support their families. I think for a lot of them, it's just like, hey, this person, like, it feels so cool. Like, I'll say this, like, when I shared my essay, I shared it on Twitter, and I got, a lot of retweets and likes, and that was cool. But on Nostr, it feels a lot cooler when someone's like, no, I'll give you, a big zap. And I was actually incredibly flattered. Lynn gave me a really large zap, largest zap I've ever gotten.
Yeah.
And that to me was like, it was really cool. She also gave me a retweet on Twitter, which I really appreciated for reach. But that like meant a lot to me because it was kind of like, someone that writes, someone else that writes, like that was like, okay, like, this is, someone truly got value out of that and they showed it to you. So I think maybe the next kind of cohort of people, they have some ideological principles and it's less about the money, although the money's nice,
right,
but more about being able to signal like, no, like your audience really got value from this.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of the group
I get it and I'm bought into that. I'm like, so you mentioned Curtis Yarvin.
Yeah.
I wonder if I think it's a reasonably values aligned, interesting, opinions talker. Like it does seem like he could be good in this context, and I don't know sort of what his thoughts are on it. But take him for example. Maybe instead of trying to convince him that he should bring his audience and that he should come here to make money, maybe you or I or somebody should host him as not like the creator but as the guest, so that there's like a dynamic where would-be creators are not sort of encouraged to come and bring their audience, but they're just sort of encouraged to show up somewhere. And you could do it, I could do it, anybody, somebody listening could do it.
Let's get Curtis on the show.
But yeah, like maybe one of the best ways to get more diversity of content is actually, be the change you want to see in the world. Like,
I love it.
Attract the new content. Don't try to convince them to do it. Just do it on their behalf. And maybe even, I don't think anybody is making enough money at this that they're doing it for monetary reasons. I think it's like you said, like you get a big zap from Lynn and you feel proud because you value that as money and she values that as money.
Right.
But maybe a new creator wouldn't yet be fully bought in, so they wouldn't have that same feeling.
Yeah.
But that's okay. Like maybe you host the thing, and you bring on a Curtis Yarvin. We're just going to use as the example, and you have all the zaps go to him.
Yeah.
And he just comes away as, I was a guest on a thing, and I just got sent a bunch of Bitcoin, and that was crazy.
Yeah.
And he doesn't have to bring his audience. You're not trying to pitch him on bring your audience. You're trying to pitch him on just show up and we're going to have a talk about whatever's top of mind, whatever's on his mind,
So I love that. And a couple of thoughts. Number one, in the podcast value for value ecosystem, that's kind of happening organically. And by the way, I do hope, eventually there will be overlap. I know Oscar and some other folks have been trying to figure out the right nips to do podcasting with Nostr. He already has the ability, you can log into Fountain with Nostr, which is cool. But eventually I think comments should be Nostr comments and all that.
Yep.
But in value for value podcasting, it's actually been really cool to see. Again, I do think there are some cases where people doing actually well with it, particularly Adam Curry is the example that comes to mind. But there's no doubt that guests that come on the show, like when I only had my one little podcast, and this is a bad example because Stu's already super pilled, but of course I added Stu and I said, okay, let's split the zaps or whatever. And I think that really works and people are like, holy shit, like it's super easy to sign up on Fountain or wherever.
Yeah.
And you walk away with 10,000 sats or whatever. It's like, that's kind of cool. Yeah. And then you read the comments with it. And so I think that makes a ton of sense. And, a question you had posed to me, off air is, what kind of content would I like to see with you and everything? And maybe that's something both of us individually, separately, whatever, can do more of is, how do we get, people, particularly out here or wherever, that are interested in some of these principles of open source, some of these principles of open identity, just host them. And then just forward sats to them, give the sats to them, show them the comments. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah. The reason I'm raising it is because I'm intrigued. I could see wanting to do something like this myself. But I want to figure out what is it? How does it fit into, helping Nostr? Ultimately, I just want to help more people see the magic that I've seen.
Totally.
And I'm willing to look far in the future, but I want to help people not have to look that far. They can, you don't have to invest all the time in playing with it and figuring it out, you can kind of just show up and kind of get hit with something. But I have a question, like a lot of times, you know, I mean, you and I have been doing these kinds of podcasts, you know, and I was doing these podcasts with people building, you know, a while back.
I love those. I listen to most of them.
That was a lot of fun. I kind of want to revitalize that and get, you know, I haven't caught up with people like, you know, like Jeff and Pablo and Hodlbot and Sovereignty and you know, G Sovereignty and these guys. So it'd be fun to do kind of, you know, get that stuff going again. But that's a little bit like Nostr content on Nostr versus is there an adjacent that would appeal to people who kind of don't really care about Nostr as much, but are willing to show up for kind of more of a freedom ideal?
Totally. I think both are valuable. I mean, I enjoyed the Nostr for Nostr, like that's great.
Yeah.
But again, I think, you know, particularly, you know, out here in SF, there are a lot of people that are not into Nostr, but are interested in decentralized identity or just open source software. I mean, from my own personal perspective, anyone that's building any of the open source AI stuff, I would love to get them on there. And my guess is if they're passionate about open source AI, they're probably ideologically overlapped with Nostr.
Yeah, they're like ready, even if they haven't gotten into it yet, they're ready to get into it.
Exactly.
Yeah. So maybe that's, I mean, actually the open source angle or framing of it is quite attractive to me, because it is, I think in the last year or so, I've always been a fan of open source and, you know, installed Linux in the 90s as my desktop. That was like going to be my windowing, you know, GNOME was going to be my windowing system for my computer. I'm very, let's say, attuned to it, but I don't think I went as hard into it as I did this last year. I'm like, wow, actually every piece of software probably can and should be open source. Just wherever. Maybe we'll stay away from the bikes here.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think
trying to get tagged.
I think I kind of got radicalized in the last year or two.
I'm with you, man.
And so that as like a topic is broader than Nostr and Bitcoin itself, but actually could be a good topic to bring in adjacent people. So there's like kind of the, you know, political freedom type, you know, thinkers that could be good people to get together. And that might be, maybe that's one show. Yeah. And then maybe open source is another show.
Well, and so first of all, I love that. I would love to help with this as well as someone that's also very interested in open source. Still running the open source community or territory on Stacker News, which is actually picking up quite a lot.
Oh, good.
Yeah, it's super random, but like that territory has grown organically and continues to grow.
Is it a lot of kind of Bitcoin Lightning Nostr open source? Or
No,
kind
I mean,
of more
there's
broader?
some of that. All kinds of random, like, hey, here's, I don't know, some like new version of Linux, or here's an open source, I don't know, voice recording software, just random shit.
Yeah.
But super cool. So I think that's a great idea. I think both sides, both the open source people will be interested in Nostr, the Nostr people will be interested in open source. So I think a show focused on open source makes a ton of sense. And there's not great open source software content. Like even a couple of years ago when I was at a different fund, you know, I was looking at open source more broadly.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot of great podcasts just focused on open source. That may have changed in the last couple of years. There were some, but like, given how big of a deal open source software is, powers the majority of the world's servers, like compared to like other random stuff, it was relatively niche still.
I also think it's, one of the reasons I get kind of passionate about it is because I think it's something that, you know, it's often, people do it more out of ideology, but it actually makes sense for everybody.
Totally.
So it's like kind of a public good. It's like part of the common good.
Right.
But it's hard to get enough energy behind it without some ideologues who are just like, I just see this as the future and this is how I want it to be and I want to help that thing happen. And so, you know, in the world of startups and venture capital, there's plenty of commercial opportunities to make money, and so there's plenty of people who will gather around those.
Right.
And open source is more like, you know, it's like, you know, the ragtag kids out in the back, you know, building Linux and stuff. So
the crazy punks that are somehow still around.
And that's kind of the energy that I actually get into more is like,
bro, me too. We're both in Nostr.
So I almost feel like almost a duty, because I can and because I care, to like help that somehow. But I, you know, in a sense, I'm asking the question because I don't know exactly.
Well, I think just doing more interviews is a great start. Like, how do we get like open source AI people, open source software company, like whatever. Like, for example, the cow.com dude. Like, He's building open source software products. Seems like he's on Nostr. Seems like he hasn't really connected with the Bitcoin Nostr community that I've seen yet.
Yep.
And he's on there. But he seems like kind of like a really good candidate for someone in that kind of both worlds.
And then this is another question. It's tangential related, but should there be Nostr exclusive content?
For sure.
What I mean by that is, if let's say you want to run an open source show, should you run it just with I played the live stream yesterday, which we should talk about.
Yeah.
That was fun. But should you just run it with like Zapstream and don't publish to YouTube and Twitch, or just be everywhere? Like should it be Nostr exclusive, where it's really native to the thing we're doing here, or should it be more meet everybody everywhere and then people learn about Nostr sort of as a side effect?
I think both can work. I think it's kind of whatever you want to do. One possibility that I've liked is, there are some people that have obviously gone Nostr only. Odell's been very vocal about this, and I think that plays a role. There's pros and cons. Obviously, you lose the ability to communicate to people on Twitter, but you also build this exclusive content that if Bitcoiners want to hear, you have to come there. Pros and cons. I think it's great. I think everyone should make their own decision. For him, that's great. I also like one thing that I've seen Lynn do a lot, which is she's still on Twitter and shares there. Kind of Jack does this too, but like on Nostr, they both share more interesting, spicier, personal, just like more interesting content. Like Lynn on Twitter is much more macro, professional. Lynn on Nostr is talking about like, taking MMA classes growing up.
I see. Yeah.
So I think that's kind of a cool way to do it.
Yeah.
But I think you should do whatever you want. Like I think one way you could also do it is maybe you like, hey, it's live on, and our homie, which we also need to talk about, Kevin Kelly. One of his takeaways with information wanting to be free is, maybe there's a delay.
Yeah.
The information, like I personally have the mind that like I don't think it makes sense to try and ever silo information somewhere. I think it wants to self-replicate and be everywhere.
Yeah.
But you can delay it. So you could say, hey, look, Nostr only live stream on Zapstream or wherever, and then a day later it comes out for the normies.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
Yeah. And then when you do it on Zapstream, I guess, so one of the things I found in using Zapstream is that it's literally the streaming software for like a Nostr client, but there's not like a video hosting service tied to it.
Got it.
So I need to separately figure out, and this is a broader question, like if you're doing a Nostr focused podcast, where do you host? Do you use all the traditionals, or is there some more Nostry version of this? And I asked the question the other day, and Pablo jumped in, he's like, Highlighter. And I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, Highlighter actually has a...
You can host audio.
You can host and video, I think.
Really?
And he has a streaming coming soon.
Damn.
So...
Damn, Pablo's, he's always ahead of the
prolific.
curve.
But like, I kind of feel like, I kind of get it, know what I'm doing, but still, I'm not sure exactly what I should be doing to do what I want to do.
I mean, look, I think, honestly, DK, like I have two comments, sort of meta comments, but one of them is increasingly, I am taking the pill of just like zero fucks, give what you want to do.
Yeah.
And like, I think it's awesome that yesterday you're just like, hey, I want to try the game show, and I don't know if it's going to work or if it's going to be like whatever polished, but fuck it, let's roll.
Yeah.
And you know what? You learned something, you had fun, and like, so I would say just keep rolling with what you got. One nice thing about publishing everything publicly on Nostr is if we get something wrong or we don't know about a service, people will just tell you.
Right.
So that's the beauty of speaking with the world,
Right.
So that's the first thing. And then I think a second thought on that is just, it's a reminder, I think Artur's mentioning this, but it really is clicking for me now. Like, if we're all right, let's say we're not all completely off our rockers and Nostr does become, a meaningful part of the internet, maybe the majority one did. Should we go over there?
We'll hop over there soon, so maybe we rock the bike lane for a moment.
Okay. Come off
Just
here.
watch carefully behind us.
Yeah, we're in a dangerous territory, guys.
Don't want to get schwind.
At the end of the day, the internet can be scary, but IRL has real consequences. But let's say we're at least directionally correct, which I think we are, almost definitionally. The surface area that we have to build is just massive. It's enormous.
Yeah.
Like there's so much, like to your point, like we're so fucking early. Like I am increasingly of the view, and I really believe this, like Nostr, for all the principal reasons, but also just like vibe reasons, reminds me so much of like what I imagined it was like to be at Bitcoin in 2010, 2011, like be in that community.
Yeah.
It's super, ideological, very sort of hacky and hackery. And like a lot of stuff kind of works, but kind of doesn't. It's not super professional yet, but you can squint and just see how big this could get.
Yeah.
And if we're directionally right with that, I mean, we all saw how, the last 15 years of Bitcoin went. Like, my guess is we're still early in that, right? We're gonna have to build so much. Like, if we rebuild all of the web and then 1,000x more because it's open and interoperable, we haven't even started.
Right.
So I don't know. I guess for anyone listening to this, I guess if you are crazy like us and believe Nostr is gonna be big, then man, like the world is your oyster. Like everything is left to be built.
Right. And do you think, I mean, I've struggled a little bit with how to help people think about where, how to build a business within these open source communities, because I mean, a lot of the beauty of open source is uncontrolled and there's no pinch points and people can remix and compose and sort of have all the tools available. But then, in a sense, it creates hyper competition at the layer of, say, like building a social media app, right? So do you have advice you give people when they're thinking through like, hey, I want to build this open source thing, but I want to think about tying a commercial service to it in like a way that's hopefully not super awkward?
Yeah, I mean, I think, first of all, like, I encourage everyone, like, explore, like, we don't know yet. And I'm fortunate that most of the Nostr teams, I think for both those that we've, worked with or funded, their burns are low enough that they have time. Because I think the reality is, like, especially as a VC betting this early, the risk is if you're too early and you're wrong, you're effectively wrong. But the bet that I'm making is, especially if guys and gals or whatever have low burn rates, as long as you're excited and passionate, maybe it takes 5 years, but like, as long as you're still around and experimenting, you're in a good position. Like, a lot of the early stuff, like, people would say, oh, it's too early to invest in the Lightning Network in whatever, 2016, 2017. And it was, because the Lightning Network didn't even, the paper was just around. There wasn't even whatever. Yeah. But like, I guarantee you would have rather invested in the first round of Lightning Labs than the last round, right? And so that's the way I think about it, is there's going to be, a lot of these companies will, probably go bust, but a couple may stick around and become really big players. And but specifically to answer your question, what are the business models? I think look for where the scarcity is. And so if the software layer becomes completely open source, interchangeable, remixable, something we all want, what are things that are scarce? Well, one, payment infrastructure. So if you're, one is the client itself, like the user interface for whatever they're doing. That's, branding or just like better experience, better UI. The payments within that, that's one easy way to monetize. Whether you do that custodially or non-custodially, you can do potentially non-custodial monetization with Nostr Wallet Connect. Something that Geyser has done as an example, with recurring payments and a small percentage going to them. You can do it in a way like Million's doing with Primal, and if it's more custodial, you can just take a direct, cut there. I don't know if he's actually doing that yet, but that's obviously a business model people could do. So payments is like a very obvious one to me. And even if payment margins go to zero, there's still a scarce resource, which is liquidity in the Lightning Network and position. So that's one area. And then another area is just like actually getting people to pay for services. Like, as funny as it sounds, like you said, like, oh, it leads to competition. Well, that's great for users, right? Like, if, if Cash App is the best, Bitcoin Lightning wallet because they just have the best team, the best UX, like it's just awesome, then they deserve to win. And then if another company comes up and unseats them, then they deserve to win.
Right. But I guess what I'm sort of asking is, I've been sort of got this working theory, which is sort of thinking about the business opportunities as kind of these layers, and not the traditional layers that we think of in Bitcoin L1, L2, but more like Bitcoin as a foundational monetary layer, and then apps are kind of a layer on top of Bitcoin. And then a third layer is maybe content on top of apps. So it's sort of a different layering system. But I think it's like at the app layer, historically, if you look at like broadly technology, social networking, or most technology, the app layer has a tremendous amount of control and power in an ecosystem, right? And so you look at a thing like, Google search or Facebook or, Instagram, an app, it's that app layer that controls everything, and that's because it's coupled to the data layer, right? The database. They own the databases that drive those app experiences. The beauty of Nostr is that you decouple the client from that data store. But along with that beauty, you also mean you get crazy competition. Everything's forkable, everything's open source. So I kind of feel like maybe there's something around like extend. If you're going to build in the app layer, you don't win just by being better, but you win by having some strategy that either connects you to the Bitcoin layer below you or the creator layer above you.
Or both.
Or both, yeah.
Yeah, I love that idea, and I know we've talked about this on and offline before, but this idea that payments are always going to be a thing, I think, but beyond that, which is kind of tying it down to the layer below, but maybe the big winners are not the tech companies at all, but the creators.
Yeah.
And honestly, like if the musicians and the podcasters end up doing really well, like I think that's awesome.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I suspect there's businesses in many of these layers and many of the interconnect areas, but maybe it's enterprise services to help bridge between a Bitcoin layer and an app layer, or maybe it's some sort of creator services that bridge between what creators need to get done and kind of what gets pushed out to apps.
Totally.
But it's like, I think in terms of commercial opportunities, I think they're going to accrue sort of, if you're building apps, you kind of either need to be reaching up or reaching down or both.
Yep.
But I think you can't just be happy competing on a better feature in an app.
It's a fair point. I also think a point you made there, which is, how has most open source software become a business? Although this is changing in real time.
Yeah.
I'm curious your thoughts on if this is no longer the case. But at least from my vantage point over the last decade or so, the formula was kind of simple. You release an open source project and then basically charge for hosting, SLAs with services for enterprises, and maybe some premium features. But my guess is, as we've mentioned on the pod, I think, is you pay for something in some currency.
Yep.
And, developers that have skill and time pay for integrating open source projects with time.
Yeah.
And businesses, which are low on time, trying to ship fast, but rich on, whatever stored value, pay in cash or pay in value.
Yep.
And so I think that model of just like helping enterprises and like basically hosting and support, like that's probably going to be a good model for a while.
Yep.
It's worked in the past, but
yeah, it seems likely.
Yeah.
That kind of thing would work. The other thing that I think so if you think about that 3-layer model that I outlined, you got Bitcoin, apps, and creators. I think there's a technology layer that bridges apps to creators, where technology is actually content. And that is, let's see, you want to go down this way?
Sure.
Yeah. That is gaming. So gaming is a category where you have, it's content ultimately. Like any game you play, like a video game, is content ultimately. But it's built, it's built with software and technology tools that create the content experiences. And those don't seem like those I think are fine not being open source always, just because they're kind of more like content than they are like platforms and tools and protocols and stuff. I mean, I don't know, maybe it'd be fun to also play with open source stuff there.
Yeah, I think it would.
But like, I'm imagining like an Angry Birds or something. I think you could have an Angry Birds type, I don't know, what are the Fortnite, whatever the popular gaming experiences are. I'm like dating myself by
whatever the kids are doing these days.
Reaching back to like the dawn of the iPhone and Angry Birds. But there are more games since then, I know.
I believe Pong is what we're looking
for. But yeah, we can go to the Vista Point over here.
Yeah, this is a great look at it.
But where content and technology actually overlap is games. And it wouldn't surprise me if there's a lot of opportunity to build sort of proprietary commercial networks, if that's what you want to do. I think that kind of stuff feels to me like it's like gaming would be a.
What do you mean a proprietary commercial network?
Like like an Xbox, right? Or an iOS app store type thing. Like if you've got a bunch of players who play game 1, you can also help them learn about game 2. And they might already have wallets that maybe you help them manage or onboard Bitcoin or something.
You're saying you think in that world, the game itself, like the software for the game, is proprietary?
Well, because the software drives the content, and the content, there's like game design and balancing and the image graphics, like, any of it could be open sourced, but it feels to me like gaming is closer to content than it is to technology platforms.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of why I'm here. We'll flip around and give you a view of Alcatraz there in the bay.
Gorgeous. Perfect day.
So yeah, just the fact that it's less, it's not like a new wallet ecosystem or something, which, I think that stuff almost, you would never use a closed source, Lightning wallet or something.
Yeah. Good luck with that.
In gaming, like, what is the weight of the gravitational acceleration, in this new fictional planet that you created? Like, does that have to be open source? Like, it feels to me more like a creator type activity.
Or maybe there's even something where like a lot of that is open source, but there's like some kind of like, I don't know, like real-time component. Like one thing that always is going to be sort of unique and scarce is like doing things concurrently.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wonder, it's like one thing, maybe the game, is completely open source and free to play for whatever you want on your own. But if you want to be in the tournament with all of your friends, there's like a coordinator that sets that up.
And that coordination type stuff to me feels like it's fine to be. It's fine to be more, think of it as content, even though it takes some technology to drive it.
Right.
But it's more content than pure technology, kind of open source technology tools.
Totally. One question I wanted to ask while we're still on the open source thing, you made a post, I believe it was a Nostra post, maybe a month or two ago, that stuck with me. I wanted to ask you about it.
Yeah.
You're obviously becoming increasingly an open source bull, you already were. But I think this post was something along the lines of like, I used to think Richard Stallman was just idealistic, but now I think he was right. He was just early.
Yeah, kind of visionary.
Yeah, or visionary. Like, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, well, I've always dabbled, I'd say, use open source tools all the time. I love open source tools, but I always thought people were taking it, like, I thought Richard Stallman was taking it a little too far. Because, like, I don't know, I think maybe I was just a little bit more pragmatic about how I assume the world has to work.
Yeah.
And I think I've sort of maybe lost some of my pragmatism and adopted some of the ideology, which is why I said before I've been kind of radicalized on open sourse. Is I think
you can start banging on some bongos.
Yeah, right, of course. but I think he's actually right. All the the way like is it the GNU license that kind of infects all the other open source that's built off of it with
I think so.
the same.
I think the MIT license is related to that, or I don't know.
MIT is a little more. I think I'm not an expert at open source licensing, but I think MIT is like you can use it, and you can use it for commercial stuff, but it's a little more compatible with commercial projects, let's say.
And GNU is just completely open.
Yeah, my understanding is when the difference is like when you use the open source tool, when you use an open source library in the Stallman sense, it actually turns whatever project you're building into being open source too by license. So then like all software kind of becomes free software.
It's a good strategy.
And like mostly software seems like it kind of should be free. Mm-hmm. Like it doesn't really have any marginal cost to produce.
Mm-hmm. Especially with AI.
Like that's actually another one that I was going to say is kind of gets me further on the radicalization spectrum here is like, software is hard to produce in the sense that like somebody has to push on a problem for hours and days and weeks to solve it. But once it's solved, everybody can get the benefit, and the monetization comes from them withholding that benefit from some people unless they pay. Which, like, I think it's been a fine business model for decades in the software industry. But like, I think the thing that I think I'm maybe newly attuned to is both like those may become more like public goods over time, especially as more people can build software. There's more competition. Things like these networks may, there may be alternatives to how kind of centralized networks and kind of data monopolies work. And then, like to your point, the AI stuff, I think can actually drop it from the thing that used to take, days, weeks, months, even years of human effort input can probably be done at some point, maybe not today, but like you can get a lot of leverage today, but maybe you can get stuff done in the course of, minutes or hours that would have taken years of human labor before.
Yeah, it's awesome.
So you have like
Beautiful vision.
huge acceleration of the creation of software, a dropping of the cost to produce, openness of the data networks. And now it's kind of like, it all lines up and it's like, well, what should you pay for? What should be monetized? Well, I can't make a good argument for what should be monetized now.
I mean, it's a great question, right? And so the only things I can come up with in that world so far, I mean, one argument is, this is the meme all over Nostr, open source, everything, and I love it. And maybe, if everything gets cheap enough, the answer is like, well, is that just a different paradigm, like a post-scarcity world? My guess is there will still be scarcity in different areas for the foreseeable future. Who knows? 1,000 years out, 100 years out, even. I don't know. But it seems to me that the scarce limiting factors in the medium term are probably going to come down to, again, human attention, which means the content itself, because you can only, there's only so much time you can allocate to watching or reading or whatever.
Yeah.
Let's see, energy. That's a really important one. I know this is a big debate in the AI world right now, which is, I guess the other one would be just compute. So, there's debate on, is the limiting factor for AI going to be compute or energy? That's an interesting question.
I hear more people arguing the energy case these days. I mean, it used to be NVIDIA's king has the stranglehold on the precious, GPUs, but I hear more and more people talking about energy as, which is ultimately like, physics foundational, property of the universe versus just like, constructs of things we've created as humans.
Well, I think it's interesting. I went to an event that Austin threw a couple of weeks back, during SF Climate Week, talking about energy and Bitcoin. And, I've been deep in this world. For those who don't know, I came from the solar energy world and was the lead author in a paper for Block with ARK Invest a couple of years talking about Bitcoin being a driver of clean, abundant energy. And I still feel very much that case. And a big part of my thesis is that the faster you bring solar down its cost curve, lithium ion down its cost curve, the cheaper it gets. You can get, it was like 30 cents kilowatt hour when I got in the industry, then 3 cents when I left a couple of years ago. You can see PPAs signed for 1.5 cents. Even with lithium ion now, you're seeing some deals, I believe, under 3 cents kilowatt hour in that same range. So that's really promising. And I think that I was shocked talking to some of these guys how much AI is going to pull it even more.
Yeah.
Because, again, I'm certainly no expert here, but from certain companies that started off in Bitcoin, they're all pivoting to AI, even though they do some Bitcoin stuff too, because the demand is so crazy that people are willing to pay. There's this concept of a PPA, a power purchase agreement, which is basically just like, hey, you can either sell your electricity to the grid, or you can have a private off-taker. If you have a private off-taker, you essentially negotiate a contract between the producer of the energy, the supplier, and the off-taker. And I need to confirm these numbers, but some of what I hear is like wildly over market. There's like the Amazon story about, buying electricity from the nuclear plant in Pennsylvania or whatever. But I'm hearing stories of like people way overpaying what the market would have been a year ago. But I guess it's a new market,
right?
Because people just really want access to power for their GPUs. If that's the case, then the TLDR is we need to, like, I thought we were going to overbuild solar and lithium ion and everything, but really solar is the solar plus lithium ion. I think we can get under 2 cents kilowatt hour, which I don't think anything else can compete with. And if that's the case, then like I thought we needed to overbuild by an order of magnitude of what we have. Maybe it's like mini orders of magnitude. And that's when we get into like Dyson spheres and all the crazy shit. But fundamentally, I still don't think that energy ever gets free. It's asymptotic, but like,
right.
I think.
But I mean, is asymptotic kind of good enough, or
maybe? Honestly, at that point, your guess is good. I have no idea.
Did you see that new lithium mine that was discovered?
California, baby.
And, it touches California, but I think it's hubbed somewhere around Reno in Nevada, right? But is it like the largest one on Earth? Was recently just discovered. I
believe, and that's very bullish for, I guess, Nevada, California, America. Just keep on winning the lottery, I think a lot of people don't fully understand how important, like once everything becomes electrified, I mean that, a lot of people are like, oh, well, we only need so much electricity to replace the grid. The reality is we can just do so much more than we currently imagine. Be that with compute, be that with green hydrogen, desalination of water, like all kinds of electric vehicles everywhere. Like, I think my biggest takeaway is from the whole energy sector is just everyone thinks too small. Like, and maybe at that point there's some limitations around energy, but the bigger limitation again comes back to human focus and creativity. Like, whatever we can dream, like it's what is it, the Jevons paradox or whatever, like the cheaper something gets, the more we actually use it,
right,
not the less we use it. The same thing with energy. Like, if energy gets asymptotic or super close to zero, we're gonna find all kinds of new things to do with electricity.
Right. Yeah. Always has been.
Always has been, exactly.
I mean, it's just like with compute, right?
Exactly, same thing.
We always find new uses for storage, new uses for CPU cycles.
Exactly. The only limiter there, I suppose, is creativity, maybe.
Yeah. So I had a kind of a random, it's probably a bad idea, but I thought it would be, I don't know if you follow much of the mining ecosystem, or I was listening to some of these podcasts where people were talking about how I guess China, Ant Pool may have quite a bit of control between all the different entities that are involved in their pool, so they might actually have, almost dangerously too much control of mining. And so I was proposing kind of a random idea, like what if we could have something like a lottery miner? It feels like it appeals both in UX and branding to somebody who might think about buying a lottery ticket. And the way you buy your, I don't know, people walk into the gas station, spend $20 on scratchers, scratch them off, and then they're like, didn't win this time, maybe next time.
Right.
But I wonder if that same kind of, not hyper-rational economic actor, but more like an entertainment, you get something of value for it.
DJ, I believe is the term you're looking for, DK.
Maybe. But like you could have like a little home. Somebody shared, I wrote a note about this on Nostr the other day, and somebody shared a thing called a nerd miner, which is like a device that kind of does mostly what I have in mind here.
It's a good name.
But it might need to be like marketed a little bit more, like even more normie accessible.
Okay.
But I like the idea of like you can buy a thing, maybe it's $10 or $20, and then you can just plug it in, and maybe you pay $10 or $20 a month for the electricity or whatever it costs. But now you're contributing to decentralization of mining, and you're playing, like, that's your lotto game.
Yeah.
Maybe you need to scratch something on a screen, or scratch a virtual scratcher on a screen, but something that sort of hits on all the notes of fun. Because ultimately, like, Bitcoin is just a form of a lottery, right? It's like, right.
Yeah, that's a very interesting take. It's true.
So I thought that might be a fun way to just like get more miners into more people's hands, and maybe contribute to decentralization of mining, and maybe you could build a new type of pool on it, and I don't know, it's just kind of a random one.
It's a cool idea, and I think two thoughts that triggers. Number one, if we've learned anything from quote unquote crypto, and with Casey's work with ordinals and runes, it's people love to gamble, and there's always a market for gambling, always will be a market for gambling, and if that has the positive externality of decentralizing the mining network, amazing.
Yeah.
It also, I think I mentioned this to you, but sparked for me an idea, something I've wanted to see for a long time, and I think we will. Maybe it'll be via Tesla, maybe someone else, but in the future, especially for kind of like really cheap to generate ASICs, I would love to see ASICs kind of come standard in every inverter. Like, I believe, eventually every home is gonna have solar panels and lithium-ion storage or something like that. And you have the inverter, which converts it, AC to DC, or DC to AC rather. And you could basically have like a little ASIC in there. And where one thing, I think it's still early, but like one, I don't know if it's a company or project or whatever that I want to see is basically, and there are some companies, Sonoda's doing a little bit of this, Satoshi Energy, but basically taking the question of, I have an electron. What do I do with it? Do I send it to the grid? Do I use it? Do I store it? Do I mine? Do I run an AI computation? Do I run a DVM?
Right.
And so I think this like real-time decision-making software for what do I do with electricity is an incredibly powerful and important idea. And yeah, it's one I'm incredibly interested in for the future.
And is that what Satoshi Energy is building right now, or they're doing a piece of that puzzle?
I mean, I don't know what all they've done recently, but I know it's an area Andrew has explored, I think on some podcasts and stuff in the past, and Sonoda has talked a little bit about that. I think all of those guys have started obviously more Bitcoin focused, but I think in general, people that are into Bitcoin and into energy, the holy grail is decentralized energy markets. Mm-hmm. And Bitcoin is certainly a piece of that. AI or any kind of computation is a piece of that. The general theme is we're slowed. In the same way, it's very analogous that, in the last century, the only way we could produce electricity was in very centralized manner and then distribute that out over the grid. And we had this grid, which is kind of the largest computer, I guess, in the world, I think. And, but it's very antiquated and it's super like top down. What does a bi-directional grid with a lot more edge intelligence look like? There will, of course, still be some big power plants. And, even with a bunch of storage, there's probably always going to be some, whether it's nuclear, nat gas, or whatever for that baseload store or that baseload. But you can also have just a lot more, okay, this area, well, there's two things you need. One, a lot more distributed, generation and usage. And having those devices and generators be smart means you can make decisions of what to do with it in real time and basically have markets for allocation. Mm-hmm. One of the challenges there, of course, is actually more regulatory and sort of permitting for transition. In the dream world, we also have high voltage DC lines where you could basically take electricity generated in California during the sunny hours and ship it to New York City as they're going through their peak demand times at night. Sadly, a lot of that issue is an issue of regulation with different grids. It's an issue of trying to get the permitting to build these, power lines and do sort of long distance transmission. China is actually taking kind of a lead here in a lot of that because they can just
do it.
Fiat has some benefits, right? Like just make it happen by fiat.
Yeah.
But I think in the long scale, what I'm really excited about is I think that information, monetary, and energy systems are all extremely linked and will follow similar structures. So the last century was a very centralized structure on all those points. And I think first we've seen information go decentralized with the internet, then money and finance, which we're watching happen in real time with Bitcoin and related technologies, and Nostr obviously continuing with information. And I think electricity and energy markets will follow. And they've already started. I mean, solar has been completely falling off a cliff for decades. But I expect in price, that's right, per kilowatt hour, which is the levelized cost of energy. Yeah. But anyways, like in the long run, I think market intelligence for everything is where we're gonna head. And maybe, your ASIC in your solar panels, maybe there's an IMPUB associated with that. And that's putting out it's like a DVM, it's putting out a bid of like, hey, I've got this electron, here's the minimum I'm willing to sell it for. And I'll give a discount, by the way, if it's to my neighbor because they're close and I can save on transmission costs or whatever.
Right. Well, I guess that should also be computable too, right?
Exactly.
So ultimately, this kind of ties back, and this may be a good place to wrap. That kind of ties back to the idea we were talking about just probably an hour ago now. But basically, is the idea from the edge, is Nostr really a public commons for kind of metadata or for kind of technical infrastructure or software to coordinate, open source software to coordinate with other open source software?
Yep.
And it's sort of like a data layer to help with that coordination and sort of the energy grid and where to use this electron and, should I send it to my neighbor? Maybe sort of a good use of a public commons that Nostr provides. And social media rides along with it.
Of course.
I think that it's a great use case, but I think it's these other use cases are actually much more desperately in need of
100%.
Like a place, and Nostr could be that, collection of places, let's say.
Totally. And by the way, I mean, you can start thinking of some wild ideas. One thing that I believe Stu from Satellite, he was the one that told me this and it really clicked. Another way to think about Nostr, so I like this metadata explanation, one that he used that really resonated with me is Nostr is an API for market intelligence. Mm-hmm. I love that because it's basically saying, what if we turn, everything into just like a real-time participating actor, which has easily, broadcastable bids or asks for most things.
I feel like you're trying to edge in a little plug for the hive mind here. Is that what you're doing? Is this like just a subtle, climb around the side door, knock twice, so you can plug your?
Well, I mean, I will say it's no coincidence. Whoa, it's no coincidence that I named the fund Hive Mind for sure. And as I've said many times in the past, I think the hive mind is inevitable in the Kevin Kelly sense of the word. Like, it's going to happen. It's like there are technological momentums and forces where the ability to wire up things together to create the next superorganism, that's inevitable in my mind. One question is, what's the character of that? Is it going to be the kind of China model where it's a centralized body's wiring everything up together and kind of controlling the flow of information? Or will it be a bottoms-up, sort of like emergent intelligence, collective intelligence, decentralized model? I'm betting and hoping on the latter.
Yeah, same. All right. Well, that seems like a nice message to pause on. So until next time.
Until next
Shall
time.
we wrap it? All right.
Keep it real, Nostr. Bye-bye.
Cool. All right.
That was great.
You can pop these, yeah. That's fun. No. And then just hit the one at the top here to get the red off.
Okay, once?
Just once, and then red.